This is our last section of our chapter on bone, chapter 6. We're going to go into bone modeling, remodeling, um, sort of how bone is remodeled, which is a process that happens throughout our life, and bone repair. If you break a bone, what happens? How does it get back to normal? And so bone remodeling is a continuous process, bone formation and loss after growth and length is finished, right? So remember, we talked about growth and length stops around 18 to 21 years old. Your epiphyseal plate completely calcifies. No more new chondrocytes, no more chondrocyte mitosis is happening. Your zones have closed up and you have your bone as long as it's going to be, right? So, but after that process is done, you can still have new bone formed by bone deposition, which is old bone sort of being resorbed and new bone being formed. Remember, we talked about in the very beginning that bone is a dynamic structure. So you can break down bone and make new bone, and not necessarily make the bone longer, but just break it down to, for instance, release calcium and then form new bone when you have more calcium. So things like that can happen. Maintenance of calcium ion homeostasis, replacement of primary bone with secondary bone, which happens as we, in our earlier years of life, bone repair, which we're going to talk about. If you break a bone, um, replacement of old brittle bone with newer bones as bone wears out, and adaptation to tension and stress as the stresses on our bone may change as in different parts of our lives. And so our bones may need to be thicker during some parts of our life when we're using them more, and then thinner later on. Right. So we're going to talk about this whole process. Right. So in the healthy bone of adults, this process of formation and loss occur simultaneously. Bone breakdown by osteoclast matches bone formation by osteoblast. So your bones being broken down, your bones being formed, your net sort of change in bone for the most part is the same. In childhood, bones deposition, building new bone happens much faster than resorption. Okay, and then once your epiphyseal plate closes, uh, they sort of equal out. All right, so bone deposition carried out by your osteoblasts. Remember the bone cells: osteoblasts, osteocytes, osteoclasts. All right, so your osteoblasts found in both the periosteum, really beneath, right, and definitely just between the periosteum and the surface of your bone, and the endosteum, make organic matrix and facilitate the formation of the inorganic matrix, right? Remember, bone is made up of an organic matrix and an inorganic matrix, all right? So secrete proteoglycans as part of our inorganic matrix, and glycoproteins that combine to calcium ions, which are part of the proteoglycans and glycoproteins are part of our organic matrix, which combine to calcium ions, which are part of our inorganic matrix. Secrete vesicles containing calcium ions, ATP, enzymes. It's all secreted by your osteoblasts, which combine to collagen fibers. Calcium ions eventually crystallize, rupturing vesicle and beginning calcification process. All right, your bone resorption. So that's your bone deposition. Your bone resorption, so breaking down bone, happens by your osteoclasts, which secrete hydrogen ions on bone extracellular matrix, right? So remember, your extracellular matrix is inorganic and organic. The osteoclast, the hydroxyapatite, that's your inorganic matrix, are pH sensitive, just like the rest of your body, but break down in an acidic environment. So you secrete these hydrogen ions, and you break down this, you can break down the inorganic matrix of your bone. Calcium ions can be liberated and reused elsewhere in the body. You also degrade the osteoclast can degrade the organic matrix, the proteoglycans, glycosaminoglycans, glycoproteins can be broken down, and they can be taken into the osteoclast. Remember, osteoclasts, they're cells, so they can bring them into the cytosol of the osteoclast. Can be taken in and then reused. All right, then we have this, so bone remodeling. Bone can be remodeled in response to tension and stress on the bones. So we talked about weightlifting for people with osteoporosis, and how if they, a lot of times they'll prescribe them to do increased strength-bearing exercises in order, because those muscles pull on those bones, and that creates tension and compression on pressure on your bones. The bones respond by getting stronger to be able to resist those pressures and cause more bone deposition, more bone building. All right, so compression, squeezing together. Squats, for instance, pressing together, occurs when bones are pressed between bodies' weight in the ground. Stimulates bone deposition. Tension, stretching forces, causes bone deposition. Pressure, doing your arm curls, creating pressure on the bones in your arms. Stimulates, can stimulate as well. Continuous downward force, this type of pressure, bone resorption, is stimulated in regions of bone exposed to continuous pressure. So what we want to do is create, this is, when I said arm curls, I meant tension. That creates tension as your bones are in tension, and then compression from the squats. So those will stimulate bone deposition. Continuous downward force, bone resorption is stimulated, right? They usually say, there was a study done where they had someone lay down for a number of days. All they did was feed the person, and they had them lay down. They studied their bones over that amount of time. And one of the things that they saw that happened is that just by laying down, and so only downwards now, all their bones reduced in size, except for the bones in their skull, which they attributed that to just chewing, eating their food. But everything else, all the other bones in their body reduced in size. Other factors that can influence bone remodeling, we talked about hormones, testosterone, estrogen. We've talked about that already. As you get older, there's a decline in your sex hormones. Also decreases protein synthesis in your bone. Calcium ion intake. Remember, we need calcium for the hydroxyapatite, and so if you're not taking in calcium, that can affect your bone remodeling. Vitamin D is necessary for your body to be able to absorb calcium, right? So if we don't have vitamin D, that could cause a problem. Also, vitamin C is necessary for collagen. Vitamin K is necessary for the synthesis of calcium ions, right? So these are some other factors that can influence your bone remodeling. All right, so we know bone remodeling is very much related to your calcium ion homeostasis. Remember, homeostasis, maintaining your balance in your body, right? So your bone stores most of your calcium ions in your body. So your calcium is stored in your bone. So if your body needs calcium, you can break down some bone and release calcium. If your body has elevated levels of calcium, you can store that calcium in your bones. Right, and that calcium can be used in different parts of your body as necessary. Right. So we have this negative feedback loop, which is controlled by our parathyroid and our thyroid. So when calcium ion levels drops, and we've talked about this with the endocrine system, your parathyroid acts as a control center, and it secretes parathyroid hormone. That parathyroid hormone will increase your, stimulates effects that increase blood calcium ions levels. So increases your osteoclast activity. So my calcium levels in my blood have dropped. My parathyroid hormone increases my osteoclasts, which break down bone, release more calcium into the body, into the bloodstream, increases absorption of calcium from the gut. So calcium that I eat, more of that gets absorbed and inhibits calcium loss in the urine. So if calcium gets filtered into my urine, actually your body reabsorbs that calcium that could be filtered out of your bloodstream and it reabsorbs it back into the body. And as your calcium ion levels return to normal, that also is detected by your parathyroid cells, and it reduces the release of the parathyroid hormone, right? So calcium levels in your bloodstream drop, your parathyroid hormone is released, more osteoclast activity, more absorption of calcium in your digestive system, and less calcium lost in your urine. And that's just showing you that process. And the same thing happens in reverse, but with a different hormone, right? So let's say you have increased calcium levels in your blood. So you will have, you'll drop your, so if your calcium levels in your blood are too high, right, you won't have any release of parathyroid hormone, but you will have release of a hormone called calcitonin, which is secreted by the thyroid gland, a little bit different from the parathyroid. You get the thyroid gland, and it has an opposite effect. Pulls calcium ions out of blood to manufacture inorganic bone matrix, most active during bone growth and less so in adulthood, right? So it's going to cause more bone to be formed and calcium to be stored in your bone. And also has effects on the absorption of calcium ions from the gut, from the vitamin D. All right, so these are just summarizing both of those, right? If you have too much calcium in your blood or too little calcium in your blood, and how your body maintains that homeostasis. Next, we go into bone repair. I'm walking down the street. I slip on one of these cracks in these sidewalks in the beautiful city of Philadelphia, and I fall and I break my arm. What happens? Right, so bones are commonly injured. People injure their bones all the time, even though they are, very strong structure. They can break. We have two types of bone fractures that listed here. Simple fractures, skin and tissue around the fracture remain intact. So, you can't see the fracture. There's a fracture, you have to basically see it by x-ray. Compound fractures, skin and tissues around the fracture are damaged. So if the bone is popping out of your skin, that's a compound fracture, okay, which obviously is very problematic because then now you have issues with bleeding and other things that are happening. And simple fractures can be, they still can be problematic, but compound fractures are definitely more problematic because now you've damaged the tissues and the skin around the bone that has also broken. So there's more to do to fix it. This is just showing you a general, some x-rays of some different types of fractures, which if this is a field that you are interested in getting into, it is definitely, bones are going to always break. I don't think that's ever going to stop anytime soon. So we will need people who are able to help diagnose it and to treat it. What is the general process by which bones are fixed? Obviously, you've seen people wearing a cast or some type of splint or something like that. They've had a broken bone, and usually it takes a number of weeks. But eventually they take that cast off. Usually they take that cast off after a certain amount of time and some more x-rays. They take the cast off and they're healed. Well, how does that process happen? Well, we're just going to go through a simple overview of that process. Right, so hematoma happens first. So blood fills in the gap between the bone fragments. Some of the bone cells around where it's broken, they die and blood fills that area. It's just like if you cut yourself, blood is the first, sort of the first thing to come. Fibroblasts and chondroblasts from the periosteum infiltrate the hematoma, infiltrate the blood clot. So you have a blood clot first, then you have these fibroblasts and these chondroblasts come in, and they form like a soft callus. So now first you have a blood clot in the gap. Now you have fibroblasts and chondroblasts, which is sort of like a soft structure in between where the bone was broken. Fibroblasts form dense irregular collagenous connective tissue. Osteogenic cells become chondroblasts, secrete hyaline cartilage. Remember hyaline cartilage from our endochondral ossification? Well, here we go. The osteoblasts build bone callus, which is this, not actual bone yet, but osteoblasts build this bone callus, which is a hard sort of covering, collar of primary bone made by osteoblasts and periosteum, forms bridge between fragments, right? So the osteoblasts help form this like hard surface over this fibroblasts and chondroblasts, which have formed this sort of soft connection, right? And then this bone callus is remodeled and primary bone is replaced with secondary bone. Right? Bone regains its previous structure and strength after several months. Right? So you break a bone, blood comes in, blood clot, obviously that's not very strong. Then you have fibroblasts and chondroblasts that come in, sort of form like a soft like connection. Then you have like the osteoblasts that sort of build a bone callus, like a hard callus over that area. And then that is remodeled by a remodeled process. So broken down by osteoclasts, built back up by osteoblasts into basically into the bone that you had beforehand. And so this whole process can take weeks to months to happen. Well, months. Usually I think they say like 6 to 8 weeks. So like, I guess like 2 to 3, maybe more months to happen. And then that bone, you know, if you know, for a healthy individual can be back to normal, depending on the type of fracture it was and how bad the fracture was. And this is just showing you a diagram, putting it all together. Blood hematoma first, your blood clot first, fibroblasts and chondroblasts sort of fill in the gap. Osteoblasts build this what we call a bone callus, like a hard outer surface, and then it starts to be remodeled goes through the process of bone remodeling and comes back to basically its original structure. And that is the end of chapter 6. Please don't break any bones. Be very careful. Wear helmets and protective gear.